It's that time of the year that's perfect to rewatch and discuss Over the Garden Wall. This miniseries is praised for a lot of things it does right, from its distinctive vintage aesthetic that perfectly matches autumn vibes, to its haunted narrative that doesn't shy away from exploring unsettling themes of loss, grief, and death, all enveloped by a mysterious gothic atmosphere. Many people have tackled in depth the darker aspects of the show, be it visual or thematic. The most outstanding of its readings is in the parallels drawn to one of the darkest and most disturbing pieces of literature, Dante's The Divine Comedy. Our perception of the show gets even more chilling with the knowledge that it references a journey to literal hell, but I think enough had been said about that. What I want to bring your attention to today is a different kind of horror that Over the Garden Wall embodies. An unsettling aspect that is not confined only within the elements of the show itself, but goes to cover the reality surrounding it, the troubling reality of storytelling today, the meta dimension to it all. If you've been here on this channel for a while, you may have noticed I love to use the word meta a lot, and while it's true that I cover a variety of genres and forms of media, you can still find a loose pattern, and it's that I like to analyze fictional works in relation to other works and the world of storytelling as a whole. Over the Garden Wall has a lot to say about that, and I think that we don't talk enough about how it's particularly groundbreaking for the implicit comments that it makes on the state of storytelling today and the discussion it invites on the very meaning of original fairy tales specifically and stories as a whole. The first implicit statement we can extract from Over the Garden Wall, without even delving into the show itself, lies in its nature as a self-contained piece of art. Over the Garden Wall is a 10 episodes miniseries that aired on Cartoon Network in 2014. 2 episodes were shown every night for 5 days, and then that's it. It ends. All that you can do is rewatch it on the streaming services where it's available, but as far as the story goes, it's over. There are no new seasons, no sequels, and no spin-offs. No matter how bad some of us wish that could happen. Now think about when was the last time you watched a show that was complete in such a short period of time, with no hint of it ever branching out into anything other than the one single piece of it you've already watched. In this aspect, Over the Garden Wall becomes an anomaly, a subversion of what has now become a norm that nobody even questions. And that's a little wild, because once upon a time, the idea of a story with closure and a fulfilling end was the actual norm. It characterizes most traditional fairy tales we know of, but now we've got so accustomed to stories expanding infinitely across different media that such a simple notion has become very strange. That any story that's complete and self-contained like Over the Garden Wall stands out in our eyes today. In an article about the show, Christiana Wisley writes that even though the miniseries was available as a digital download through iTunes and Amazon, the release date and staggered broadcast schedule acted as a small rebellion against the death of event television. It gets to the point where, upon the show's release, some critics drew conclusions on it after only 2 episodes have aired, probably because they were so used to shows infinitely recreating virtually the same episodes over and over that they thought it would be fair to analyze it based on 2 episodes only. In a review of the show on Strange Horizons, Erin Harakova points out the lack in early reviews of the show that assessed it based only on 2 episodes and ended up dismissing it as, quote, cutesy wootsy fairy tale program about 2 brothers and a bird wandering through a wood called The Unknown. She continues to say that the reviewers made criticisms that the rest of the plot flatly invalidated. They misunderstood the type of story they were handling, and they did the project itself a disservice. And so I think all of this was due to the fact that the idea of a show having a whole story that ends and thus needs to be analyzed in its entirety has become so strange. And don't get me wrong, this isn't strictly a criticism of how our understanding of stories evolve today. It's not taking a stance against or in favor of this phenomenon, but I find it fascinating how Over the Garden Wall invites a reflection on that. There is something unsettling about the way we are compelled to confront realities we got so accustomed to that we've become unaware of their existence. Now, if we look at the show in itself, with its narrative and aesthetics, we can also find other elements of subversion that might fly over our heads. A surface level engagement with Over the Garden Wall may make you more fixated on its nostalgic vintage look than anything else. That becomes especially true when you look at the overwhelming number of reviews that praise it exclusively for that and treat it as a piece of decorative art perfect to put up every autumn. And even reviews that criticize it tend to describe it as a show that prioritizes style over substance. These are sentiments that come as a result of the ambiguous nature of its story and its nature as a nostalgic work that feels like it's paying homage to old classic fairy tales and nothing else. But just like our expectations for a never-ending expansive story, this idea that most of the media that we consume is only capable of retelling older stories and paying tribute to them is also a result of, again, the current state of film and TV. We're in an age where merely building upon content that already exists is the absolute norm. So now all of us naturally expect the recent works to be, if not straightforward retellings and adaptations of older works, then self-aware commentaries that attempt to be subversive towards the exact same works recycled over and over. Now there is enough reasons to believe that Over the Garden Wall is partially just that. In the end, it does pay a tribute to classic animation with all the visual allusions to 19th and early 20th century artists and illustrators, like in the episode of Schooltown Follies where Greg and Wirt attend school with animals in period dress, styled on the illustrations of 19th century New York children's book publishers, the McLaughlin brothers, or in the episode of Babes in the Woods where Greg is lifted up to Cloud City and meets singing angels and animals in a scene straight out of the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz. When it comes down to it, there is a sense of the familiar in Over the Garden Wall. We just don't get to put our fingers on its references as easily as we now have become accustomed to in other shows. So it feels at the time familiar but also different and unique. On that, Christiana Wilsey writes that instead of making the strange familiar, the show makes the familiar strange, offering a fairyland that is all the more uncanny for being close to home. The miniseries pays its respect to tradition, but not only by explicitly inserting the most familiar references, but by representing instead a variety of works that have long been forgotten. That rings well with the lyric, "All that was lost is revealed." That is also the title of Wilsey's article, in which she goes to say that Over the Garden Wall paradoxically produces a scene of originality and authenticity by the depth and variety of its literary and artistic intertexts. One of the many works it's compared to in the article is the Shrek franchise, where fairy tale tropes get adapted and then explicitly subverted and presented as self-aware satire. But the thing with stories like Shrek is that, despite their self-awareness and deliberate attempt to subvert the tropes, they still end up including them. Whether they are adapted under a positive or critical lens will not change the fact that we keep seeing the same narrative and visual patterns of the same handful of fairy tales that we are all familiar with at this point. For instance, in its attempt to subvert the damsel in distress trope that we see present in popular fairy tales like Sleeping Beauty, the movie Shrek employs that same trope in the aim of subverting it by letting Fiona take action and rescue herself on her own. But even then, Wilsey argues that as long as these tropes still end up driving the stories, not much becomes new or original about them. On that, she says that while the parodied rescue scenes of Shrek draw on a satirical demystification of fairy tale formulas and motives already active in popular culture, the effect is merely humorous and transient because the alliance of fairy tale and romance still ends up shaping the story's closure and emotional power. Now, Over the Garden Wall breaks that tendency by choosing to replicate the essence of fairy tales that we're not familiar with to create something original. Again, according to Wilsey, the miniseries responds to the ironic self-awareness of recent postmodern fairy tale adaptations by stripping away a century of popular culture associations and using motifs not as a kind of narrative shorthand, but as an artist's palette of evocative available images. In privileging imagery and sound over lessons, Over the Garden Wall captures something that has become vanishingly rare in children's media, the moral ambiguity of fairy tale worlds. In the end, this show will stand out on its own for a while and will only be capable to return to it every fall to get a sense of what good old stories sounded and looked like. Chances are, if it wasn't created 9 years ago, it would have never even existed looking at today's state of television. And so with that in mind, we see a horrific reality not only in what the show is, but by simply existing. It serves as a reminder of what every other show isn't. Everything we may have lost forever.
All that was lost is revealed.
Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to this channel if you like the content here. Now I've got to say goodbye and see you in another video.